What connects a hero of the Soviet Union Gold Star and the feathered headdress of a Mohawk Indian chief? The answer is one man. A man who officially burned to death in the sky over Ukraine in 1944, but was found 20 years later, alive and ruling a tribe in the forests of Canada. Or perhaps it's legend and fiction? Let's find out. This is the incredible story of Ivan Datsenko, the pilot who became Poking Fire. Forget everything you think you know about heroism from Hollywood movies. Ivan Datsenko was a high-performance gear in the most terrifying war machine in history, forged from ultra-strong Soviet steel. Born in the heart of Ukraine, near Poltava, his true rebirth came in 1941 when he first lifted his IL-4 bomber into the midnight sky. To give you some context, an IL-4 wasn't a comfortable aircraft. It was a flying fuel tank wrapped in thin metal and fabric. Inside that cockpit, it was cramped, freezing, and perpetually smelled of high-octane gasoline and burnt oil. For a long-range bomber pilot, every single takeoff was a one-way ticket, but Ivan Datsenko managed to return that ticket 213 times. Think about that number for a second. In the aviation world of the 1940s, surviving 10 missions was considered a miracle. If a crew survived 20, they were usually given a permanent vacation in a monument in their honor. Ivan Datsenko went out to the target 213 times, meaning he didn't just cheat death once, he outplayed it over 200 times in a row. Every night, he climbed into that cockpit knowing the odds of coming back were nearly zero. His targets weren't just tanks in an open field, but strategic hubs deep behind enemy lines, airfields, ports, and massive railway junctions. From the frozen hell of Stalingrad to the burning ruins of Orel and Kursk, he passed through every circle of fire World War II could offer. He was a ghost of the Ukrainian and Russian night skies, a shadow the Germans grew to hate and fear. How did he survive? His fellow pilots whispered that Datsenko had a predatory instinct, sensing German night fighter ambushes through his very skin. Imagine a flight lasting 5 or 6 hours in absolute pitch-black darkness. Your only connection to reality was the dim phosphorus glow of the instrument needles dancing in front of your eyes from the heavy vibration. You couldn't use the radio and you couldn't turn on any lights. You flew through a void while thousands of German flak anti-aircraft guns below waited for a single searchlight to catch your silhouette. The moment you were caught in that beam, you were as good as dead. The flak would start tearing the sky to pieces, tossing your bomber around like a paper plane in a hurricane.
Ivan navigated through these firestorms over 200 times and lived to tell the tale. As a flight commander of the 10th Guards Regiment, he was part of an elite force thrown in where regular aviation failed. Ivan was famous for a terrifying, almost manic level of precision. He didn't just drop bombs near the target. He forced his navigator to hold a perfect course, even while the sky around them was erupting in steel. He obliterated German tank echelons heading for Stalingrad and scorched fuel depots that left entire Wehrmacht divisions stranded without a drop of gas. There was a price on his head, but he remained an elusive phantom of the night. In September 1943, with over 150 missions already behind him, the official decree arrived. He was awarded the Gold Star of the Hero of the Soviet Union, the empire's highest honor. In those days, his face was on every propaganda poster, labeled as the son of Ukraine, hero of the nation. Yet fame didn't offer him protection. Instead, it demanded even more dangerous feats. He continued to fly, even though anyone else in his position would have taken a safe desk job in the rear. Datsenko couldn't stop. He had the hunter's blood in him and kept pushing his luck against the odds. By the spring of 1944, the war had rolled back to western Ukraine,
and the front line was closing in on the Polish border. The Germans had turned the city of Lviv into an impregnable fortress, a vital hub for their final reserves. If this transport artery could be severed, the German front would collapse. Ivan received the order to destroy the Lviv 2 railway station, marking his 213th combat mission. He lifted his heavy machine off the airfield as the sun dipped below the horizon, unaware it was the last time he'd see the ground from his faithful IL-4. That night near Lviv, he wasn't flying toward another medal, but toward the end of his life as a Soviet hero. A strange metamorphosis was about to begin, leading to the most incredible mystery in the history of modern warfare. The screen turns blood red, and the image of the aircraft begins to fade into the blackness of the past.
April 19th, 1944. The night sky over western Ukraine was unnaturally quiet until it was suddenly torn to shreds by a wall of fire. Ivan was piloting his IL-4 toward the strategic target of the Lviv 2 railway junction, unaware that the stars had turned against him.
I remember the smell of the cabin, the cold metal and the oil. Then, in a heartbeat, the world turned orange, and I realized my wing was no longer part of the plane, but part of the fire.
A heavy shell exploded directly in the left engine, turning the aircraft into a screaming torch that illuminated the clouds for miles. Ivan fought until the very last moment, muscles straining against the locked yoke to give his crew precious seconds to bail out into the abyss.
The heat was melting my flight suit, and the screams of the metal were louder than the engines. I had to stay at the controls. I couldn't let my boys die in that furnace.
Ivan landed heavily in a dense, frozen forest somewhere in the triangle between Lviv and the Polish border. He had to crawl through the undergrowth, his body bruised from the high-velocity impact with the branches, knowing that German search parties were already on the move.
I lay in the snow, listening to the silence of the woods. My plane was burning somewhere in the distance, and for the first time in my life, I felt the terrifying weight of being completely alone on the earth.
For Moscow, Guards Captain Ivan was already officially dead. A dry, bureaucratic report reached headquarters stating that the aircraft had been downed and the crew failed to return.
I looked at the gold star on my chest. In the moonlight, it was a target. If the Germans found it, I was a dead man, and if I went home, I was a suspect.
That night, burrowing into the frozen earth for warmth, Ivan made a choice that would change history forever. He decided not to return to the Soviet lines, choosing instead the life of a ghost over the certainty of a gulag or a firing squad.
I dug a hole in the mud with my bare hands and buried my documents. I wasn't a hero of the Soviet Union anymore. I was just a shadow in the forest, starting my longest flight.
The following months were a cold, agonizing blur of survival and shadows. He moved westward, traveling only at night and avoiding any main roads where German patrols or local police might be stationed.
I survived on raw potatoes stolen from fields and the kindness of strangers who were as broken as I was. You learn to speak with your eyes when your name is a secret you can't afford to tell.
The famous ace, once known even to the Kremlin, had turned into a nameless drifter moving through the ruins of occupied Europe. He crossed the shifting borders of Poland under the cover of smoke and chaos, often sleeping in haystacks or bombed-out barns.
I stood in the crowds of refugees, watching the world burn. No one looked at me and saw a captain. They only saw another man who had lost everything in the fire.
Legend suggests that during this long trek, Ivan was eventually captured, but he maintained an ironclad lie. He posed as a simple peasant, surviving in a prisoner of war camp under a false identity.
I sat in the barracks, listening to the roar of our bombers high above. My heart wanted to scream their names, but my mouth stayed shut. I had already died once, and I wasn't ready to die again.
When Germany finally collapsed in 1945, Ivan reached the Allied occupation zone, blending in with the masses of displaced persons. He understood that Europe was still too close to the reach of the Soviet secret police.
The Americans looked at my hands and saw a laborer, not a pilot. I looked at the maps of the world and chose the farthest place I could find, a place where the past couldn't find me.
He chose Canada, a land of endless wilderness, a place as vast and cold as his homeland. When he finally boarded the steamship in a fog-covered port, he was a man with no country and no name.
As the ship pulled away, I watched the coast of Europe vanish into the mist. I threw my old life into the Atlantic waves and didn't look back. I was ready to become someone else.
Ivan settled in Quebec, adopting various names and identities until he could secure reliable Canadian documents. He intentionally chose physically demanding labor in remote logging camps and mines to avoid the Soviet agents who were actively tracking non-returners in the major cities. By the late 1940s, he found his way to the Mohawk community in the Kahnawake reservation near Montreal. His expert knowledge of cartography and celestial navigation became invaluable to the tribe during complex land boundary disputes with the government.
The forest didn't care about my past or my medals. Here, for the first time in years, I felt my hands were needed for building something new, rather than just clutching a yoke in anticipation of death.
One of the few remaining threads connecting him to his homeland was his sister, Maria, back in Ukraine. Historical accounts suggest she received letters from Canada through an on-demand postal system where Ivan used coded phrases to let her know he was alive and safe. Within the Mohawk community, Ivan married the daughter of a respected elder and built a new life from the ground up.
What a beautiful sunset.
It's perfect. I'm so glad we're here. Look at the pretty light!
See the needle? It always points north.
So we follow the needle to go home.
Exactly. You're a quick learner.
He raised his children with strict discipline, blending indigenous traditions with the orderly habits of a former career officer. His connections to the outside world were not entirely severed, as he reportedly maintained contact with the Ukrainian diaspora in Canada. These former military circles likely helped him navigate Canadian bureaucracy without ever exposing his true identity to Soviet officials.
I knew that in Moscow, my file was stamped "Missing in Action." Every letter to my sister was a risk. If intercepted, it would be a sentence for both of us. So I learned to write only between the lines.
In the 1950s, the community officially elected him as their leader, recognizing his strategic mind and steady hand. He took the name Poking Fire, a title under which he became a prominent public figure representing indigenous interests at official functions. As chief, he implemented elements of military organization within the reservation, streamlining supply logistics and land protection. His leadership transformed the community into one of the most organized and self-sufficient groups in the region. Despite his high status in Canada, Ivan lived for decades under the quiet shadow of potential deportation or discovery. He never sought official rehabilitation from the USSR, knowing the system would view him as either a deserter or a ghost.
Captain Ivan died in the flames near Lviv in 1944. Chief Poking Fire was not a mask, he was the man I built upon the ashes of a life that no longer belonged to me.
In 1967, during the Expo 67 World Fair in Montreal, a significant encounter occurred. The famous dancer Mahmoud Esambayev was stunned when the high-ranking chief suddenly addressed him in fluent Ukrainian. This encounter sparked rumors that eventually reached the KGB, yet Ivan remained untouchable due to his Canadian citizenship and the fierce protection of his tribe.
He no longer hid his past, but he never sought to return to it either. Ivan lived out the rest of his life in Canada, never seeing his native Poltava region again. When he passed away, his grave and the reservation bore no red stars, only indigenous symbols and the eternal sound of the Canadian woods. My war didn't end with a surrender or a parade, but with a hard-won peace within myself. I traded the gold star for eagle feathers, and it was the most important flight I ever took.
Ivan's secret could have gone with him to the grave, remaining forever a part of local indigenous folklore. But in 1991, shortly before the collapse of the USSR, the famous dancer Mahmoud Esambayev gave a fateful interview in which he openly spoke about his meeting with Chief Ivan in Montreal. These words caused a media explosion. People couldn't believe it. Could a hero of the Soviet Union, officially listed as dead in 1944, really have been leading a tribe in Canada for decades? The KGB could no longer silence the story. The truth had broken free. In the early 2000s, the famous TV program Wait For Me organized a massive investigation. A film crew traveled to the Kahnawake reservation to find traces of the mysterious poking fire. Local elders, initially reluctant, eventually confirmed, yes, there was an outsider, and he was a warrior. In the early 2000s, the euphoria surrounding the discovered hero was replaced by cold analysis. A search team arrived in Canada expecting a sensation, but they were met with silence. No grave bearing the name Ivan Datsenko existed. Legal documents claimed that John Poking Fire was born in Canada long before the war. While facial recognition pointed to a near-perfect match, the paperwork told a different story. Legally, they were two different people.
People want to believe in miracles because the truth of war is often too bitter. Perhaps I really did burn in that plane near Lviv. Or perhaps I became the man you so desperately wanted to find. Truth isn't always what is written in dusty archives. Sometimes it is simply what lives on in the memory of others.
Was it a brilliant deception, an impossible coincidence, or the greatest mystification of the 20th century? We may never know for sure. Ivan Datsenko remains in history twice, as the fearless hero who fell over Ukraine and as a beautiful legend that dissolved into the forests of Quebec. He moved on, leaving no forwarding address.